Hello everyone, welcome back to today's story. In this episode, we follow Jack and Tu Tien as their quiet life takes an unexpected and emotional turn. What seems like an ordinary evening slowly reveals the weight Jack has been silently carrying. The crushing pressure after his company collapses. As stress builds beyond control, a single night changes everything, forcing both of them to confront a reality they can no longer avoid. As Jack reaches his limit and Tu Tien steps in to hold everything together, they begin a journey not just of survival, but of facing the truth together. Stay with us as this powerful story unfolds. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support truly means the world to us. The late afternoon light stretched softly across the small kitchen as Tu Tien moved quietly from the stove to the wooden table, her hands working almost automatically. The gentle sizzle of oil filled the air as slices of eggplant soaked up the rich sauce, while the faint bitterness of mugwort mixed with the comforting scent of fried eggs. Everything looked warm, familiar, and carefully prepared, just the way Jack liked it. But today felt different. She paused for a moment, holding the wooden spatula mid-air, her eyes drifting toward the doorway, as if expecting him to appear at any second. The silence lingered longer than usual. Normally, by this time, she would hear his footsteps outside, the sound of the gate, or even his voice calling out casually. Today, there was nothing. Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, Tu Tien lowered the heat and stepped outside, walking slowly toward the small pond behind the house. The water reflected the fading sky, rippling gently as she tossed a handful of grass into it. The fish gathered quickly, their quiet movements creating soft circles on the surface. She watched them, without really seeing. Memories began to surface, small, ordinary moments that now felt heavier than before. The two of them planting vegetables together under the sun, laughing when the soil stuck to their hands. Evenings like this, cooking side by side, sharing simple meals that somehow felt like everything. The warmth of Tet's celebrations, the way Jack would insist on doing things himself even when he was clearly exhausted. Back then, she thought life had finally settled into something peaceful. But over the past few weeks, something had changed. Jack had been quieter, not distant, but careful. The kind of careful that made every word feel measured, every smile just slightly delayed. At first, she told herself it was just work stress. After all, running a company wasn't easy. There were always problems to solve, decisions to make. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. She sat down by the edge of the pond, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze unfocused. If I had never met him, the thought crossed her mind briefly, but she quickly shook her head. That wasn't something she truly believed. No matter how things turned out, meeting Jack had changed her life in ways she couldn't ignore. And maybe that was why the worry felt so heavy. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she could feel that something was wrong, and that Jack was carrying it alone. The sound of footsteps finally broke the silence. Tu Tien looked up immediately, her heart lifting for a split second as Jack appeared at the entrance. But as he walked closer, something about him made her chest tighten. His posture seemed heavier, his steps slower than usual, and his face, Though he tried to smile, it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're home," she said softly, standing up. "Yeah," Jack replied, forcing a light tone. "Got caught up with some things." She noticed he had come on foot again. "You didn't take the car?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "It's still at the service center," he answered quickly. "They're fixing something. Should be done soon." The explanation came too fast. Tu Tien nodded but didn't press further. Instead, she simply said, "Dinner's ready." Inside, the small dining space felt warm under the soft glow of the overhead light. The dishes were already laid out neatly: braised eggplant glistening in sauce, golden mugwort omelette sliced evenly, and a bowl of steaming rice placed between them. Jack sat down, taking a deep breath as if trying to reset himself. "Wow," he said, picking up his chopsticks. "This looks amazing." Tu Tien smiled faintly. "It's just simple food." "Simple, but perfect," he replied, taking a bite. "You always make it taste better than anywhere else." For a moment, things felt almost normal again. They ate quietly at first, the familiar rhythm of the meal bringing a brief sense of comfort. But Tu Tien couldn't ignore what she was seeing. Jack's movements were slower, more distracted. He would pause between bites, staring down at the table, as if lost in thought. "Work has been busy?" she asked gently. Jack nodded without looking up. "Yeah, a bit." "A bit?" she repeated softly, studying him. He let out a small laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "You know how it is. Just some pressure. Nothing I can't handle." But the way he said it didn't sound convincing. Tu Tien placed her chopsticks down. "Jack, you've been coming home late, and today you walked again. Are you sure everything's okay?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Then he looked up, meeting her eyes with a reassuring smile that felt carefully constructed. "I'm fine. Really, just dealing with a few things at work. It'll pass." She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But something deep inside told her that this wasn't just a few things. Still, she didn't push further. Instead, she reached for his bowl and added more rice, her voice soft. "You should eat more. You look tired." Jack nodded, quietly accepting it. "Thanks." The rest of the meal continued in gentle conversation, but beneath the surface, both of them were thinking about things they weren't saying. Jack kept steering the topic toward lighter subjects, small stories, random observations, anything to avoid going deeper. And Tu Tien followed along, responding with small smiles, even though her mind was elsewhere. Because the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Something serious was happening. And whatever it was, Jack was doing everything he could to keep her from knowing. After dinner, Tu Tien began clearing the table while Jack insisted on helping, though his movements lacked their usual energy. Plates clinked softly as they worked side by side, the quietness between them no longer as comfortable as it once was. "You should rest," she said. "I'll finish this." "I'm okay," he replied. "Let me help." But as he reached for another plate, his hand paused mid-air. For a brief moment, he seemed unsteady. "Jack?" Tu Tien frowned. "I'm fine," he said quickly, pulling his hand back and forcing another smile. "Just a little tired." She watched him carefully now, her concern deepening. Because this wasn't just stress anymore. There was something more, something he wasn't telling her. and she had a feeling that whatever it was already beginning to take a toll on him in ways he couldn't hide much longer. Outside, the night settled in quietly, wrapping the small house in stillness. Inside, the lights remained on, but the warmth from earlier had faded into something heavier, an unspoken tension hanging in the air, and neither of them knew that this was only the beginning of something far more serious than either of them was ready to face. The night deepened, and the quiet around the house became almost overwhelming. The soft hum of insects outside blended with the faint rustling of leaves, creating a calm that should have felt peaceful. But inside, something was unsettled. Jack lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His eyes were open, but unfocused, as if he was looking through something instead of at it. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner, casting long shadows across the walls. Every sound felt distant. Every breath felt heavier than it should. He turned slightly, pressing one hand against his chest. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was pressure, the kind that didn't come from the body, but from somewhere deeper, something tightening slowly, constantly, like it refused to let go. From the other side of the room, Tu Tien noticed. She had been folding clothes, trying to keep herself busy, but her attention kept drifting back to him. There was something about the way he was lying there. Too still, too quiet. "Jack," she said softly, walking closer. "You're not sleeping?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, after a few seconds, he let out a slow breath. "Just thinking." She sat down beside him. "About work again?" A faint smile appeared on his lips, but it was tired. "Yeah, something like that." Tu Tien hesitated, then reached out, gently placing her hand over his. His skin felt colder than usual. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said quietly. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." For a moment, Jack didn't move. Her words lingered in the air, simple but heavy. He wanted to tell her. He really did. But the moment he imagined saying it out loud, that everything was gone, that the company he had built had collapsed, that the pressure had already gone far beyond what he could control, something inside him tightened even more. "I'm okay," he said finally, his voice low. "Just a rough period. It'll pass." Tu Tien looked at him, searching his face for something more. But all she saw was that same careful expression, the one that hid more than it revealed. She nodded slowly, though her heart didn't feel convinced. "Try to rest," she said. "You need it." Jack closed his eyes, but rest didn't come. Minutes passed, then more. His breathing became uneven. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable, but gradually, it changed. Shorter breaths, slightly quicker, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that felt off. Tu Tien noticed immediately. "Jack?" She leaned closer. "Are you okay?" No response. She touched his arm, gently at first, then a little firmer. "Jack." His eyes opened suddenly, but they looked different, not fully present. He tried to speak, but his voice caught halfway. His hand moved instinctively to his chest again, gripping tightly this time. The pressure had returned, stronger. He sat up abruptly, breathing faster now. "I can't breathe properly." Tu Tien's heart dropped. Hey, look at me," she said quickly, moving in front of him. "Slow down, breathe slowly." But it wasn't working. Jack shook his head, his breathing becoming more erratic. His chest felt like it was closing in, each breath shallower than the last. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. "I can't," he whispered, panic beginning to take over. "Something's wrong." Tu Tien grabbed his shoulders, her voice steady but urgent. "We're going to the hospital, right now." "No, it's fine," he tried to protest, but his words came out weak. "It's not fine," she said firmly. "You're coming with me." There was no hesitation in her movements now. Within minutes, she had helped him up, guiding him out of the house. The night air hit them immediately, cool and sharp, but it didn't ease the tension in his chest. Every step felt unstable. Jack leaned slightly against her, his strength fading faster than he expected. His breathing was loud now, uneven, and his thoughts were spiraling. Not like this. Not now. He had held everything together for so long. He wasn't supposed to break like this. They reached the road, and Tu Tien quickly called for help, her voice tight but controlled. Every second felt stretched, each moment heavier than the last. When the vehicle finally arrived, it felt both too fast and too slow at the same time. Inside, the world became a blur. Lights passing by, voices overlapping, the distant sound of instructions being given. Tu Tien stayed close, her hand never leaving his, even as people around them began to take over. "It's okay," she kept repeating softly. "I'm here. You're okay." But Jack could barely hear her now. The pressure, the noise, the overwhelming weight in his mind, it all merged into something he couldn't escape from. Then gradually, everything faded. The hospital room was quiet, too quiet. Soft white light filled the space, reflecting off clean walls and sterile surfaces. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, sharp and unfamiliar. Jack opened his eyes slowly. For a moment, he didn't recognize where he was. Then it came back. Not all at once, but enough. The pressure, the panic, the loss of control. He shifted slightly and immediately noticed the IV line attached to his arm. Machines beside him emitted steady, rhythmic sounds, far too calm compared to what he had felt earlier. "You're awake," Tu Tien's voice. He turned his head. She was sitting right beside the bed, her eyes tired but focused entirely on him. It looked like she hadn't moved in hours. "What?" His voice was rough. "What happened?" She exhaled slowly, relief washing over her face. "You collapsed. They said it was severe stress. Your body just couldn't handle it anymore." Jack closed his eyes briefly. Severe stress. Such a simple phrase, but it didn't come close to describing what he had been carrying. Tu Tien leaned forward slightly. "Jack, the doctor said this didn't just start today. You've been pushing yourself for too long." He didn't respond, because she was right. The long nights, the silent pressure, the constant fear of everything falling apart, and then watching it actually happen. "I should have told you," he said quietly, his voice almost breaking. Tu Tien didn't interrupt. "The company," he continued slowly, forcing the words out. "It's gone. I lost everything." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not uncertain, not tense, just real. Tu Tien looked at him, her expression soft but steady. "I know something was wrong." Jack let out a weak laugh. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." "And now?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then shook his head slightly. I can't. For the first time, there was no pretending, no carefully constructed reassurance, just the truth. Tu Tien reached for his hand, holding it firmly. Then we face it together, she said. Jack looked at her, surprised. I don't care about the company, she continued. I don't care about money. I care about you. Her voice didn't waver. You being here, that's enough. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief, not yet, but something close. For the first time in a long while, the weight didn't feel like it was his alone.